Hi, folks. The other day I was listening to a podcast called Rogue Running. Some of you may have heard of that. And Chris was talking about how to race a half marathon. And as I listened to the podcast, I thought two things. I thought, number one, well, what a great idea. I could do a video on how to race a half marathon because I don't think I've done that before. And then number two, that the things that he was saying and recommending were pretty much in lockstep with everything I'm about to say. So if you happen to listen to that podcast, it's not that I stole ideas from Chris, it's that they're good ideas for how to race a half marathon. So all that being said, let's get into my thoughts, and I guess his as well, on how to run a really great half marathon. So the example that I'm going to use is I'm going to assume that your goal is to run a sub 2-hour half marathon, which is about a 9-minute pace on average. I'm also assuming that your course is fairly flat and you've probably got just a light wind. So why am I saying that? Well, if you've got a lot of hills in the course, it's obviously going to make a difference to how you do your paces because your pace isn't going to be going the same uphill, your pace won't be going the same downhill. Likewise, if you have a lot of wind, that could be a factor as well. I did a half marathon some years ago where we went straight north for 6.5 miles, turned around and came straight back. Well, on the path north, we had a really strong tailwind behind us, but we had to fight that wind coming all the way back. So I made some adjustments to my pacing plan to account for that. So I'm assuming your course is fairly flat and you've got kind of a light wind. Again, looking for sub 2 or a 9-minute pace on average. When you're looking for something different, you would just adjust your paces accordingly. So first, let's talk about pre-race. So before the race starts, you want to do somewhere between a 1 and a 2 mile very easy warm-up. You're then going to want to do 4 to 5 goal pace strides. So not strides that are all out like you might normally do a stride, but you want to get some work done at about your half marathon pace. 4 to 5 of them, a little bit longer, maybe 30 or even 60 seconds long. You kind of want to get your heart up and get that rhythm of what that marathon pace feels like, or half marathon, excuse me. Now, one thing I will say when I say the 1 to 2 miles, should I do 1 or should I do 2 miles? A lot of that depends upon the conditions. If it's the warmer and more humid it is, the more I'm going to be maybe a mile. And then, frankly, in some really warm and humid, I might not even do the mile. I might just jog for a few minutes and be done with it because I don't want to be sweating too much and giving up my hydration. Conversely, if it's a nice cool day, I probably want a couple of miles because I really want to get my body warmed up. But you get those 1 to 2 miles, you want to do the 4 to 5 goal pace strides. And then dynamic drills, the types of things that hopefully you're doing before speed work, butt kickers, high knees, toy soldiers, and things like that to really get your body limber and ready to go for the race. Now, ideally, you're doing these things as close to race time as you can. Obviously, depending upon the race, you might need to do that quite early. Some really large races, the Indianapolis mini marathon, for example, 35,000 people, you can't do that just before the race starts. You got to get out early, but you do want to try and do that. Now, my approach when you do a half marathon is to break it up into 3 races, and that's just how I tend to look at it mentally. I look at your first race is a 5K, it's actually only 3 miles. Your second race is a 10K, that's actually 7 miles. Then you have another 5K 3.1. So I've got a different strategy for my pacing for each of those 3 races. So when I go into a half, I've got those 3 races per se, and I'm going to pace them differently. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that a lot of people like to bank time. Banking time is a myth. What we want to do is we want to bank energy, not time. We're going to save a little bit of energy at the beginning so that we can spend that at the end, which means, I'm going to talk about running negative splits. So a couple things with negative splits. First of all, negative splits are actually fairly minor. I'm talking about the second half of your race being maybe 15, 20, 30 seconds faster than the first half. It's fairly small. I think sometimes people think that a negative split is, 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes. It's generally not going to be that big. It's fairly small, but it's slightly negative. The other thing they'll say is, well, I can't do a negative split because I always slow down around mile 9 and 10, and if I go too slow in the beginning, I'm screwed at the end. Well, if you're slowing down at mile 9 or 10, it's because you were too fast at the beginning. The idea here is, like I said, we want to bank energy, not bank time. So how do we bank that energy? So your first race, that first 5K, which is actually 3 miles, I want that first mile to be about 9:15, maybe even 9:20. You want your first mile to be about 15 or 20 seconds slower than your goal pace. If your goal pace was 8, think 8:15, 8:20. But get out more slowly. And people are worried that if they start too slow, they won't be able to recover later. So let's say you really screw up. Let's say instead of 9:15, you run 9:30. You're 15 seconds slow. If you can't find a way to make up 15 seconds over the next 12 miles, then there's another problem. Now, you're not going to make that up all at the beginning. I still recommend you put that towards the end, but it's really hard to get out too slowly. And getting out there helps you be more relaxed. It gets the body in the groove. It also helps prevent a lot of weaving, because when you're anxious, I got to get to 9 right away, you tend to weave around people, especially in a crowded race, and that just burns energy. So relax, take it easy. First mile about 9:15. Let the second mile drift down just a little bit, maybe about 9:10. And that third mile, you're going to be starting at 9:10, but by the end of the third mile, get down to 9. I'm not talking about the entire mile averaging 9. I'm not talking about running at a 9 pace for the last 3/4 of a mile. I'm talking about very gradually working it from that 9:10 down to you're at about a 9 pace by the time you get to the end. So that is your first 5K, your first race, and your pacing strategy for that. This is where you are banking energy. Your second race is the 10K, which is actually 7 miles. You want those at your goal pace. You want to run them all pretty close to 9. Now, you're not going to be able to run exactly 9. You're going to run 9:05. You're going to run 8:56. But you want to be right around 9 as close as you can for all 7 miles of that second race. And now comes the third race, the most important race, and that is your final 5K. This is where we're going to take that energy that you banked in the beginning, and we're going to spend that. Your first mile of your second race, which is really mile 11, you're going to drop that pace down, maybe about 8:50. Take it down, 10 seconds or so. For your second mile, which is mile 12, maybe 8:45, your last mile, go. You give it what you can. You give it everything that you've got, not sprinting. And in fact, really, with the entire last 3, the better you're feeling, the more you can give that. Now, I will say sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes you go, I don't know that I've got that for that mile 11. If you don't, then hang on to 9 and try and spend some of that energy in miles 11 and 12. It's better to do it over all 3, but you got to make a judgment call. But, in those last miles, it's whatever you got, you want to start giving that and finish, and hopefully get, in this example, your sub-2 in that marathon. Now let's talk then about fueling and hydration, because fueling and hydration is an important consideration in a half marathon. I'm going to break this up into 2. So first of all, if your goal is to run under 2 hours, you probably do not need any fuel. You don't need to take gels, and hydration will vary. So let's start with the fuel. So people are going to say, oh, wait a minute, I have to take a gel. Take a gel. I don't care. You can take a gel. You can take 5. It doesn't matter. There's no prize at the end of the race for the person who fueled or hydrated the least. You can go ahead and take it. What I'm saying is the vast majority of people don't need to have that extra fuel if you're going to be under 2 hours. If you're over 2 hours, it's a little bit different. Play to your own strengths. And the reason I said hydration varies, what's the weather like and how fast are you going to run? So let's look at the elites as an extreme example. The elites are done with a half marathon in a little bit over an hour. They might not be hydrating at all because they're done so fast. On the other hand, if it's going to take you an hour and 59 minutes, you're probably almost certainly going to have to hydrate, but how much depends upon the conditions. When in doubt, I would take a little bit more than you think you need rather than a little bit less. But there's a big difference between running that 2-hour marathon or half marathon in 65 degrees versus 45 degrees. Your hydration will vary a little bit. Now, if your half marathon is going to take you over 2 hours, you probably do need to be taking a gel, maybe 2. That's probably the break point where you're going to need a little bit of fuel in that race. And again, hydration is going to vary. You're more likely in that over 2 to probably want to hydrate at every single stop. But again, the temperature is going to matter. If it's that 35 or 40 degrees, you might not need every stop. I'm here to tell you if it's 60 plus degrees, even 55 plus degrees, you're probably going to need to hydrate every place. So fueling and hydration really matters with what your finish time is going to be and your own personal experience, and you learn through time what's going to work for you and then what you have to do. And then the final thing I'll talk about is a little bit on the mental side of the half marathon. I'm not going to go into great depth on that. That's really, I think, another video, but of course it's important. So mentally, in my experience, the half marathon shouldn't feel particularly hard until around mile 9 or 10. So if I'm at mile 5 and I'm starting to go, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold on to this pace, that's kind of early. It might be like, you know what, maybe this isn't my day. Maybe I need to back this off a little bit because it shouldn't be worrying me yet at mile 5. But on the other hand, by I get to time of mile 9 or 10, that's where my brain is starting to go, can you still do this? This is feeling pretty hard. I think that's a normal thing and something I use as a gauge to tell me whether or not maybe I'm going, too easy, too fast. But again, if you get to mile 5, you go, oh, this feels pretty doable. That's pretty early to make a decision that you want to pick up the pace because you're not even at the split yet. And then finally, it's the last part. It's miles 11 through 13.1. It's that last 5K you're running. That's where the mental part gets really tough. What exactly do you need to do? Again, that's an entire another video. It's your own tips and tricks. But I think one thing is to expect those last 5K to be hard. If you are running hard, you are looking for a great performance, it's going to get tough, and you're going to need to have all those tricks that you employ that hopefully you know that help pull you through that. So again, those are my advice and advice from Chris as well on how to run a successful half marathon.